Hello and welcome to the webinar to help you prepare for Phase 32 of the Emergency Food and Shelter Program, also known as EFSP. My name is Maggie Snyder and I staff the State Set-Aside Committee, and today on the webinar with me is Lucinda Nord, who is the chair of the State Set-Aside Committee. So today we're talking about EFSP. Many of our more experienced local board members will remember that this program may have been called FEMA Rent, FEMA Food, or FEMA Utility in the past. During the webinar, we will be using EFSP. As you all know, EFSP is a federally funded program that is designed to provide local decision makers some say over how to spend funds toward relieving local needs, primarily in food and housing. EFSP has been running behind the fiscal year for the last few years, with multiple delays. Final reports for Phase 31 were released in January and were due March 2nd. However, we understand that the national office is allowing a few jurisdictions with transactions in process to complete second payments and final reports. If you fall in this category, please be sure you complete this ASAP. Phase 32 is technically for the federal fiscal year that ended September 30th, 2014. We've been preparing for the official release since last summer. The Indiana State Set-Aside Committee met in December in anticipation of official announcement. We received the official notice on February 24th and had our State Set-Aside Board Plan approved March 12th. The map on this slide shows the blue counties that received state set-aside funds, the yellow counties that received direct awards, and the white counties that have chosen not to participate in Phase 32 due to several reasons. Now let's talk about roles and responsibilities. We understand that a certain individual representing a certain organization may actually hold multiple roles in this process. However, serving as the administrator, on the board, or chairing the board while also serving as an LRO is a conflict of interest. The EFSP rules do not prohibit this conflict, but do require that the conflict is openly discussed, documented, and addressed. If you have such conflicts in your community, be sure you have strong board attendance and appropriate notice for application by other potential LROs. The individual with the conflict should not vote on funding for their own organization, and all actions, abstentions are documented in the minutes.
Great. So as referenced earlier, one of the best features about the Emergency Food and Shelter Program is that certain funding decisions are made here in Indiana. Our State Set-Aside Committee reviews data about poverty, unemployment, recent calls to 211, and food insecurity to make those decisions about the formula that we're going to use. By the rules, we could actually award to all of the funds just to a few counties, but your State Set-Aside Committee here in Indiana has remained committed to the value that every jurisdiction is eligible should be able to participate in EFSP. And we know that every jurisdiction in Indiana has people in need. Remember that this is a need-based program, not an income-based program. And our State Set-Aside Committee wants to make sure that funds are maximized, are spent here in Indiana and not returned. This is why we work so hard to identify communities who prefer to opt out of the process earlier, and we really appreciate that. We also try to work to resolve any compliance issues so that funds can remain here, and that then what we do is if a county opts out, we redistribute those funds to other counties through the formula. This is our list of the committee members on the State Set-Aside Committee, and we thank them for their service. They work very diligently in evaluating how funds should be used and working through some of the compliance issues. So the committee has offered you some tips. They want to make sure that local boards and local administrators and local recipient organizations, we also call LROs, simply read and follow the rules. This is a very rule-based program. Because of an IPERIA, which is known as the Improper Payments Elimination and Recovery Act of 2012, the national office is trying to achieve a zero-based error rate, which means that you have to achieve a zero-based error rate. Because of prior findings, the national office is working to double check and triple check every step of the process. So just imagine with me the scale of this work. If we have 93 jurisdictions in Indiana, and then you multiply that times the number of LROs, and then multiply that again times the number of transactions, you can imagine how much double and triple checking that is. This is why we are recommending to local boards that you consider minimizing the number of transactions that you offer with the funds. For example, if you have LROs who are very experienced and have been successful with the documentation for rent or utility, mass shelter, or mass feeding, you feel free to continue that work. However, because these processes are so complicated, some local boards have actually found it more efficient and effective to award to a food pantry. For example, for 2 purchases from the regional food bank, we know that this can maximize those dollars and minimize the transactions or opportunity for error. We also encourage you to use each other. We have a lot of experienced administrators and LROs in our network who know exactly how to process those payments or to create the documentation to make sure that it passes muster. Please ask for help to make sure that every I is dotted and every T is crossed in this process.
In terms of your local board decision-making and process, here are a few reminders about your responsibilities. Your local board has required and optional seats. Develop your board, call a meeting, elect or re-elect a chair. Note that the administrator and chair each have the ability to sign the documents. Sometimes the administrator and chair are the same person. This is also where we miss some jurisdictions because there's only one email address that the national or state office communicates with. You might consider providing us a second email address just in case of job changes or other situations that could result in not getting any notifications sent to your county. When you hold your board meeting, you will need to make a few key decisions that will need to be documented in your minutes. For example, your board will decide whether to meet 2 or 4 times a year. If you select 4, then you must meet 4 times. However, if you select 2, then you are allowed to still meet more frequently if necessary. You need to document if conference call or electronic votes are allowed, and then keep the documentation of those meetings and actions. And most importantly, you will discuss local needs, what LRO or LROs may be funded or for what purpose. In prior years and by the national guidance, you want to be open to new organizations applying. However, because of the compressed time period this year, your local board might create a preference that will help you maximize funds and remain in compliance. For example, some of your jurisdictions may have an LRO that has consistently had compliance issues, turned in reports late, or has had staff turnover where there are capacity issues that may not allow success in Phase 32. Your board is required to allow them to apply, but you may establish a priority for those most able to succeed in meeting the objectives of the EFSP program by the rules in the manual.
Thanks, Maggie. And finally, we want to remind you of some of those compliance issues or questions that we have had or we've seen. Some of the issues are with the board, and some of the issues are with the LROs. So let's just talk quickly about some of the things that get caught. So, for example, the local board has to reflect the required seats. So I'm going to flip back a couple slides so you can see the state set-aside committee. So here is our committee, and you can see that what we've noted is that our government official through the State Department of Health, that position was actually vacant at the time of our meeting in December, and we can document that. So if you have a position that is supposed to be a part of that committee at your local board level, make sure that you reach out to that United Way or Red Cross or Salvation Army or Catholic Charities office. If you truly don't have one of those offices in your area, then simply put not available, or if the position is vacant at that time, list that it's vacant. But you do need to show that. You'll also need to see, reflect in your minutes that there was a quorum of the board at your meeting. Did you provide public notice to the LROs, and how was that documented? They may ask you for a copy of the paper or the newspaper and the date where it was presented. Regarding conflicts of interest, you'll want to make sure that those are documented appropriately and disclosed and reflected in your minutes. And then for a local recipient organization or an LRO, really make sure that you are looking at the allowable expenses, doing the process for payment and request exactly by the manual, and then making your spending and reporting deadlines. And remember that they're a little different for this Phase 32. And then finally, we want to remind you about some of the impacts of what's going on at the national level. So you know that the EFSP program is housed at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, but there is an effort to move it to a different department at Health and Human Services. That may cause a little bit of a delay, or it may even cause some significant changes in the future. We also know that the funding has been tied up with some budget negotiations, and that's why we have some of the delays. The budget has been reduced over time, although some of you may remember that we had a significant increase during the peak of the recession with the stimulus funding, and also because we had very high unemployment in Indiana. As our unemployment rate has gone down and the number of persons who are unemployed in a given county have gone down, our total available funding for EFSP in Indiana for Phase 32 has also gone down. We also acknowledge that the administrative fee that is available through the EFSP program is simply not covering the work. We know that you are doing much more work to administer this program than the administrative fee is covering. We have had that communication with the national office, but there's not an openness at this point to change that because it's congressionally mandated and very connected to some of the scrutiny that is currently underway around this type of program, and as is all types of programs that are currently under the microscope by Congress. And then finally, I want to offer to you a little update about the National Emergency Food and Shelter Program Office, which is in Alexandria. They have made significant efforts to try to improve customer service. They've heard you, we've advocated on your behalf. But I just want to remind you that they are working very hard in the midst of this declining funding support, in the midst of increased scrutiny, the IPERIA audit, and these expectations of a zero-based error rate. So I ask you to please treat the national office staff with respect. You know, they're on our team. They are trying to help us maximize these dollars for Indiana, and there's simply not enough staff to carry out the work for the thousands of LROs and transactions that they're required to process by these overly complicated laws and rules that are out of their control. So we're all in this together, trying to help our neighbors in need. So Maggie?
Now we're going to take a look at some of the websites you can use when gathering the information for EFSP. The first link, efsp.unitedway.org. There it is. It shows you, it has the board manual on it. Latest news on the left will tell you about final reports and when Phase 32 is coming out. When you go to your community and funded organizations, it'll tell you more about your county and information on who your local board has given to in the past. And so if this is new to you, it may be good to reference that.
I'm just showing a quick example so you can see that.
And here we have our IAUW EFSP site. This is where this webinar will be, and we also have the manual on there, the state set-aside recommended amounts from the state set-aside board, which have been approved. We also have the memo that we sent to local board chairs and administrators, and we'll have question and answer documents on there, the key changes document here, and any other information we can share that we think will benefit the local board and administrators.
And let's see, thanks Maggie. I see we have a few questions that have come in on the question box. So one of the first questions is about the webinar and the slides and the question and answer, and as Maggie just mentioned, we will be posting those online so that you can refer those. You can go back and refer to those, or actually you might encourage your local board members or your LROs to watch those. So let's see, we have a question about what are the significant changes for Phase 32. That's a great question. So let me just flip back to that key changes document. Excuse me. Let me find it for you, that key changes document. One of the most important changes that you'll see is in the area of the spend and report dates. So remember that this was for federal fiscal year 2014. It's actually, they've extended the spending periods into 2015, but you have a compressed time period for that. Notice that there are some certification forms. We know that a number of organizations missed or had compliance issues because they failed to submit their certification forms. And then lastly, the spreadsheets. We wanted to highlight that there are specific ways to submit the spreadsheets if you are doing certain types of allowable expenses that are all explained in the manual. So please take a peek at those before you engage in the kind of spending, so you know what you need to collect before you start. So let's see. I think I'm getting through the questions. We have a question about conflict of interest. Great question. So we have a question from Kim about when a person, and this happens a lot in our rural communities where we have an individual who is the chair of the local board, works at an organization, so is also serving as the administrator, and because that organization is one of the few organizations in the community, is also with the LRO. So how do you manage that conflict of interest? We recognize, because of the required seats on the local board and because this is for every jurisdiction, we recognize that there will be conflicts of interest. The issue is that you make sure that you are developing an actual board that has those required seats, you have good attendance, you openly discuss the conflict of interest. So the chair would say, you know, my organization is applying as an LRO. We acknowledge that this is a conflict of interest, and I will simply abstain from that vote, and then the rest of the board actually makes that determination. We fully anticipate that lots of the LROs will also serve on the board. If you have questions about the conflict of interest, don't hesitate to give us a call about how to reflect that in your minutes. Let's see. We have a question about the Jewish community in terms of that representation. Again, if you have, looking at your required board seats, the national office is looking to see, do you actually have a Red Cross, a United Way, a Salvation Army, a government official, somebody in your community. If you list that they're not available and the national office finds that their person is available, your plan will be denied. So we encourage you to make the invitation and get permission to add them to your board roster. But we recognize that there are certain communities that, for example, won't have a Jewish community, and then you just write not applicable or not available in your board roster. And that may happen with a couple of those seats. Well, let me see. I think we have one. We have two more questions that are related, and it's all about timing. We have questions about, can you post the announcement of the availability of funds even if the board has not met? Yes, you may, and I would in fact encourage that. So now that you all have received, or as you're receiving your notice from the national office, you should go ahead and prepare the notice that Phase 32, you're announcing Phase 32 availability of funds, and that the board is planning to meet. Here's the application process. You provide that notice both in your local paper, and then if you have an email distribution or other ways that in your community, that's how nonprofit human service organizations find out things. Feel free to put it there as well. But you need to make that posted notice. You can do that before you meet, and then your board can meet later and make the determinations. Your board can also meet first and then make the determinations, then make the notice, make tentative kind of decisions like we want 100% going to food, or we want 50% going to food, 50% going to utility, assuming that we get those kind of applicants. And then you can reflect in your minutes that you will allow subsequent decisions to be made through electronic vote or conference call. And that simply needs to be reflected in your minutes. So the timing of the notice and the board meeting, I know that some of you are already getting notices that you have early April dates for your board plans to be due. That is not a problem. Just say in anticipation of award or in anticipation of decisions, this is how we're doing that. You reflect that in your minutes. If you have questions about how to phrase that, feel free to give us a call here in the state office. So I think I'm looking through. I think that concludes all of our question and answer. So this is Lucinda Nord, and thank you very much, Maggie Snyder, who staffs this work. Both of us are here in the statewide office and available to help you. Our goal is to make sure that all of you have strong local boards and are able to distribute this funding through LROs and maximize the dollars and make sure that you can use that. If you have questions about how to make those food purchases, for example, through a food bank, or if you have questions like I need a sample copy of a notice to put in a paper, or I need a sample application, don't hesitate to give us a call. We may put you in touch with someone else in the system that also does a similar kind of work. But again, feel free to give us a call if you have any questions, and we thank you for joining us today on this webinar. This concludes our EFSP Phase 32 refresher.